Okay. Um, uh, Hi, my name is Hillel Echo-Hawk. Um, I am a member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma and adopted uh, Upper Athabascan tribal in in the interior of Alaska, and I am the owner and operator of Birch Basket Catering. I focus on traditional indigenous foods of the Americas, with a real focus on Pawnee foods and Athabascan foods, because those are my foods that I've grown up with. And I do a lot of teaching. I do a lot of history. About half of what I do is like food history and history of indigenous people and what what colonialism has done to Native people from the beginning to now to where we are, um, and how food has played a part in all of that. And I have been a cook for about 7 years now, I think. It's kind of hard; it all kind of blurs together.
I like
And
I think. It's true. It does blur together at some point. It's like it's been one long like year, and it's been actually a decade. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah. It's like I started, like, my first cooking job was a prep cook, and I honestly don't know when I started that job. It was like forever ago. And
It sounds about right for this work. It really does sound correct.
and and then I started culinary school and I was a waitress, and it was yeah, all sorts of restaurant jobs.
Oh yeah,
Um yeah,
the wild and
done
crazy
it
of it.
all. Yeah,
Yeah,
done it all.
it's.
Um
I don't think anyone can really escape working in food without like having touched all of those jobs at some
uh-huh.
point. You're just like, oh, so what else have you done? I'm like, we've worked in the dish pit. I've busted tables. I have like,
Mhm.
you touch all points and
Mhm.
and sometimes it's obvious when someone hasn't.
Oh
And
yeah.
you're like, maybe there's a benefit to that. Like, I would encourage you to cross train yourself in some other areas if you're working in a restaurant, because it gives you really different perspectives on how at what point in the process that someone's touching the food,
Mhm.
and it tells you like, okay, this is what they're responsible for, so it gives you a whole new appreciation for the process overall when you're looking at it from beginning to end. So
Mhm. Mhm.
oh yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
most
thank
definitely.
you. 7 years. Wow. I work before food, like before because 7 years doesn't seem like a long time, but when you've worked in food, it's like dog years. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm always like, oh, before I worked in food, and it's like, is there a before I worked in food? I'm like, but there was. It just seems like I've done this longer, and I really haven't. So before you were in food, what were you doing?
Um, I I grew up in a very religious family, and so I was a missionary for 2 years.
Cool.
Yeah.
Where?
Um, I was based out of New Zealand,
Oh, okay.
and and out of New Zealand, I went to Thailand, India, and Fiji,
Okay.
with this group called Youth with a Mission. Um, and it's the at that point, I don't know if it still is, but it's the world's largest nonprofit missions organization.
I think it still is. I mean, I'm
Probably
not
still
sure
is.
how like COVID has impacted any of those types of like in
Yeah.
organizations at this point, but I think on last check it actually still was.
Yeah. Oh, you know,
Yes,
why would?
you'll find that within this community of folks that there's a lot of like those shared
Mm-hmm.
historical points and like cultural
Mm-hmm.
points is like, oh, I grew up in this particular type of space, and so depending on which church you went to or denomination you were in,
Uh-huh.
there's always some type of shared or like some type of cross referencing of those
Oh yeah.
particular things. So yeah, so it's yeah, I always tell people like when they're like, you know about that, I'm like, you'd be so surprised about the things I have experienced in my youth and in my young adulthood. Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh
wow.
yeah.
So what called to the transition for you?
Um, a couple things. Um, I had applied for a worker's visa to stay in New Zealand, but I was denied because um, I have uh, epilepsy,
Oh,
and
okay.
New Zealand has national health care, and they didn't
Oh,
want to pay for my medication.
gotcha.
So I was like, well, I guess I will
Won't be
go
staying
back to
here.
the States. and and so I came back to the States and was like, well, I've always wanted to go to culinary school. I've always wanted to cook for people.
Mhm.
Um, Even when I was uh, doing missions, I was like always in the kitchen. I was, you know, as much as it was allowed for me, I was feeding people. And so I I went to culinary school, and it took a while, like prereqs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But um, I knew that as a Native woman, I knew that I was going to have the education to
Yeah.
to to back it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I was like, yep, that's another shared experience. It's just like, oh, I have to have all this documentation to say that I know what
hmm
I know in order for
Uh
you to
huh.
even give me an opportunity.
Uh huh.
And other folks don't tend to have those, don't have to jump those hurdles
Right.
frequently like we do.
Right.
Where did you end up going to culinary school?
Here in Seattle, Seattle
What do they have? A culinary
Culinary.
institute? Is it culinary
They they
institute?
they do. It's actually at a. Why can't I remember the name of it? Oh my goodness.
I know.
Um.
I've called that this year. I've deemed that exact moment in your brain where the information escapes. I've called that the trapdoor. And
Oh,
you're in the middle of a thought, and it's like a trapdoor opens up, and the information you really need just falls out the bottom.
that's a
You're just
great
like,
way
I.
of putting it.
It's like,
Because
oh,
it's
the
like I
trap.
can see the building.
And that's the worst part. It's tormenting you because you're just like, I
It's
can see
like
the building. I know the names of these people. My memory is like
yeah,
it's a blank spot in your memory. You're just like, why
yeah.
can't I recall that right now? I don't
And
know what's wrong.
it's gonna come to me.
It's fine. At some
Okay.
point
Anyway.
when it comes to you and you shout it out, we'll understand exactly what that's for. And it'll make total sense for people. They're like,
Yep.
oh, that's what that is. Um, wow, that's hilarious. Cause it's that I think that attitude or yeah, that attitude of service, like that's connecting people from all walks of life that have worked in other industries or have served in other places. Kind of that's what calls to a lot of people when they get into food. Is like there's this sense of service and
hmm
generosity that you carry with you from where you were and you bring that
hmm
in with you, and it's like one of those spaces that you can it highlights that and encourages that a lot more. And then for those of us who end up falling into like the teaching space, I think that is directly linked to like, some of our history as far as like some of our cultural history. So whether you grew up in like a religious household or you grew up in a household where you had educators as parents or things like that, I think some of us fall into that category because we tend to, when you're working in missions, you tend to share your faith a lot. So you're in that process of constantly like teaching or sharing in a way that's
hmm
what's the word, informative. And so that skill set just kind of carries over into the
Mm-hmm.
next space. And so most times people are like, I don't understand how'd you make that connection between that career and that career? Just like, well, there are some very weird things that that people don't think about when you work in food professionally, that those skill sets that you have to call on, and they don't think they
Mm-hmm.
belong there because they're like watching like Hell's Kitchen or something crazy, and you're just like,
Right. It's
that's
not how it
television,
is.
guys. That's not
Yeah.
cooking. It's television. It's
That's,
entertainment. And
yeah.
so yeah, because like I worked for a chef that worked for Chef Ramsay, and
Oh,
we had a chance to like talk about his work and like what they did together and that kind of thing, and what he learned from Chef Ramsay. And he was like, well, unfortunately, like American TV really called on him to be a specific type of character on television. He's like, but he's so far from being that guy that it's weird to watch him sometimes. And you're like, that's interesting, because I think people think that like shows like Hell's Kitchen are like genuinely like reality television, and you're like, not really. That's like super produced, and like almost like
oh
there's a
yeah.
director, and people don't like really put it there. And I'm like, it's a competition show, so it should be interesting. But yeah, like Chef Ramsay was that guy who like would fly home on Sundays to have dinner with his family no matter where he was. So
Yeah,
that's
he's
who
like a
he is.
super family guy.
He's like super, and he's super generous, and he loves to teach, and he wants to see people do well. And so that's why I was always like, people get the weirdest perceptions about food, but that's because they get all their information from like television and movies. And you're just like, oh, if you only knew, if you
Mhm.
only knew.
Yeah.
When you found yourself teaching more, was that like organic? Was it intentional?
It was pretty organic, because when I say like I focus on traditional indigenous foods, people are like, what does that mean? Like what is, traditional indigenous foods? Uh, and so then like, oh, it's, you know, the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. It's sunflowers. It's, 73% of the world's food comes from North, South, and Central America. If you take away what Lois Ellen Clark, who was the first Native um, chef to get a James Beard Award for her cookbook, which is so amazing. I think that's somebody who you should have on your, because
She's on the list. She's on the list.
she
If
is.
anybody has, I'm like, if anybody has her email address or contact
I do
information,
have her
please let
email
me know.
address. I'm like such a
Please,
fangirl of hers.
please
Um,
share.
okay, I will. Yeah. Um,
That's how I get things. That's how I get people on the show. Really, I'm just like, do you have that email address? How can I get connected to them? I have them on the list, but I don't know how to get to them. Oh yeah,
um, yeah, because she's so amazing. Oh my goodness, I'm like,
yeah.
can't you tell? Yeah.
She
um,
needs to be here. We all, this is agreed on. We just need to figure out a way how to do
yeah. Okay, got you.
it.
Um, um, okay, but so she came up with the big eight, and that is corns, beans, squash, vanilla, chocolate, um, uh, uh, um, potatoes, and something else I'm forgetting. Um, what was the eighth one? Oh, it's gonna drive me nuts. But if you, but the way that those food items have gone throughout the world and have changed the
Yeah.
world.
Oh yeah.
Um, but people don't think of them as coming from like native people, you
I
know?
just, that's so. I guess because like the way I grew up, it was part of like my grandmother was both of my grandmothers were educators, and so those were just that was just part of their education. They were like, well, these are the
Hmm.
foods that are indigenous to the Americas, and this is where those things came from. So they found their way into the rest of the world through these channels, and but
Hmm.
this is their home. And so I just never it never occurred to me that other people did not know that information until like the last few years, where especially corn, where there's been like those conversations around like commodity corn and like large like commercial farming, and like how overplanting corn, soy, and wheat have caused such agricultural upheaval
Mm-hmm.
for so many people, and especially like smaller farmers. And people are like corn, and I'm just like, yeah, like commercial corn, commodity corn is used for so many things that are non-food applications. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you're growing things in the ground that essentially end up being a non-food application, like you have to think about what you have destroyed in the process, and like what happens to the native versions of those crops and of those
Mm-hmm.
plants. So like having those conversations in the last few years, and people are like, oh, I didn't know like North America
Uh-huh.
was the home of, or South America was, especially when we started talking about, because I had a conversation with another indigenous chef. She's indigenous to Peru. And we talked about like things like quinoa and
Mm-hmm.
those particular types of grains. And she was just
Uh-huh.
like, all this, like the labeling of things as superfoods. And the fact that most of those things are just indigenous crops to the Americas that people have been eating for thousands of years.
And and those crops 100, 200 years ago were burned so that the indigenous people couldn't eat.
Right. I was like, food warfare is always like the first line of defense when it comes to like
Mm-hmm.
imperialism, is like, if we can cut off the food supply. And it's an old school war tactic.
That's one of the things that I talk about. I say that you look through history, look at any country that's being invaded.
Yep.
One of the first things that they do is they take over the food supply,
Yep. They attack your
and
food supply or
they and water
infest it.
supply.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's like, because if they can starve you out or cause a drought or whatever it is, like, if because they forget, like people forget there's layers to that. If you have no water, then you can't water yourself or your crops or your
Mhm.
animals. So in order to
Mhm.
destroy an entire like breed of animal, you have to do the same thing to them as you're doing to the people. You have to starve them, and
Mhm.
you have to deprive them of water. So yeah, it's been interesting to have like these talks with people, and they're just like, I'm like, it
Yeah.
just keeps like, it's a resounding thing, like how little thought people give to their food. And
Such little
just,
thought.
just, I'm like, so you're just chewing and swallowing. And I just don't, it's so weird. I was like, it's one of the most like intimate acts you will ever commit. And so like I was like, outside of sex, like when else are you going to actually ingest something or take something in from another person,
Mhm.
like physically, like tangibly?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, it's such a personal thing, and I'm like, how do you not have thoughts? But I guess if you have like if people don't give thoughts to who they are intimate with, I can't imagine why they
Yeah.
would think about their food in a higher in a higher way, or in a more like sacred way. So yeah. What were some of the first things you learned how to cook for yourself or for your family or for your community?
Um, so I grew up in a really big family, and my mom was always cooking. Like, I feel like she was always cooking, and so I was always in the kitchen with her. Um, and some of the first things I learned how to cook were eggs. Um, and because my mom scrambled eggs and my dad scrambled eggs were very different. And so
Yeah.
and
Oh wow.
so I needed to and so I learned how to make my mom scrambled eggs first and then my dad scrambled eggs.
Right. All right, guys. See what we
Um,
got going on here.
yeah,
Yeah.
because it's, everybody likes their eggs just a little different.
It's a little different, and you're just like,
Just a
ooh,
little
this is
mhm.
way different. All right, friends. Uh-huh.
Yeah, because my dad's scrambled eggs are, like, so dry, and my mom's scrambled eggs are, like, more on what I like,
You're
a
like,
little bit more
fluffy,
fluffy.
and yeah.
Yeah,
Dry scrambled eggs are so weird. Uh, you're just
yeah,
like, what's this texture? I don't know what I'm eating right now.
I know.
Because they're simultaneously like dry and they like weep at some point because they're
Mhm.
losing moisture from like
'Cause they're
all ends. You're like, how is
yeah,
this possible? What have you done here?
yeah. It's like all of the proteins are just, like, completely
You're
just
like,
like they're like,
okay,
"I'm done.
I'm done. You've
I'm
cooked
done."
me too far and I can't live here anymore. You're just like,
Yeah.
all right, this is not great. Did you were I guess because like on that list of eight, since eggs don't necessarily make the list, what's the historical kind of like entry point for like eggs in indigenous cooking?
Um, so we didn't have, like, chicken eggs,
Okay.
um, but, like, duck eggs and things like that, like wild
Okay.
bird. Yeah.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Because it's I'm always like, okay, so what birds do we leave alone? What birds do we like use the eggs? Because I imagine like not everybody's out here cracking robin's eggs to put into some butter in a saute pan,
Right.
but it's like duck absolutely. Um, yeah, in those common ingredients, like there's certain things that kind of cross borders and oceans, and so like eggs are one of those things. Dumplings and those types of things, like those particular additions to a meal. So like when rice was introduced into Europe through wow, see, trapdoor right there,
Uh-huh.
friends, right there,
Yeah.
through the moors of North Africa. And then you think about like the where like rice kind of like runs everywhere at that point, but I think all cultures have something like rice in their diets. So whether you're using like a quinoa or a farro or like or any of those particular types of grains,
Mhm.
you find those commonalities across the board. So like when I started cooking and realizing like how frequently people use like quail's eggs and things of that nature, I was just like, oh, okay, so we're only getting like a part of the picture when it comes to just using these chicken eggs, guys. All right, that's
Mhm.
fine. And so like the further along you go in your career and you realize the variety of things that you can get your hands on. And then where those things come from and like why aren't we using them with more frequency, and it's because it brings it back to that same conversation about like land stewardship and like, okay, so let's stop planting wheat for a while and maybe plant rye. And like the variety and the diversity in your food ways just kind of create a more robust and healthy food way. So yeah, so I'm always curious about, I'm like, so what kind of eggs are you guys eating over there? You cracking the ostrich eggs? What are you doing? um so for you're finding your culinary voice in this space. So because you do have a number of folks like cooking from this particular viewpoint, from this viewpoint, and dialing down like what you resonate with, what you do well, like what the message you're trying to send through your food. Where did you start to like develop that, and like where are you sitting with that right now, and what are you really trying to say with what you do?
Um, I really started to develop this, when I was in culinary school. Like, I knew this is what I wanted to do. Um, this is the focus that I wanted to do. Um, and it was really apparent to me while I was in school that it was like not even a thought that my teachers were having, that my other classmates were having. Um, and so it was like really frustrating for me that that was the case.
Yeah.
and and I've always been the person who's like, if I'm frustrated, I'm going to let you know. And if you're wrong, I'm going to let you know.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. I'm not serving you if I don't. Yeah, definitely.
yeah. And 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 so it was, and I was not the best student. I was a really horrible student for a really long time.
Mm.
Um Probably because I was like, no, you guys are wrong. Like
Yeah. It's like, this is not going well you all, this is incorrect. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a weird, yeah. Yeah. Like culinary education is such a antiquated institution at
Mm-hmm.
this point. I don't even know where to like how do you unscramble that egg? Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, and this was like this the education that I was getting was like I feel like it was pretty progressive because we were learning not just like French technique. We were learning all sorts of different techniques and styles. And this school has it was one of the first schools to have its own um, uh, greenhouse. It was which was like a huge selling point for me. Um, uh, they had a in the summer we would go around to like all of the different farms in Washington, um, and just to like see like what was happening. We would go to plant and stuff. Like it was a very cool um, system. Um, just so it was like we're really and getting the feel of like farm to table
Yeah.
is not just words. Um, but the language that they
Mm.
were using was very antiquated.
You're like, okay. Yeah, it's like you've managed to like do these things over here, and yet
Uh-huh.
you're kind of just stuck in time over there. I just
Mhm.
okay. Yeah,
Mhm.
which of course speaks to like leadership and the lack of like representation at that level. Because you're like, okay, you had enough people thinking we need a greenhouse, we need to do some other things that are a little more innovative and like trendy because eventually this is where food's going to go, and then to not have anybody in the space to go, well, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, you have to talk about language and how we talk about food and not just what we cook.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Mhm.
hmm
Mhm.
yeah, I can see that
And
being a problem.
and so I was always like, uh, uh.
I'm like, raise your hand and say something because if you don't, it just continues. And then eventually you're out of the class and the next group of people are like ambushed by like
Mhm.
really poor information or terrible language or just, and then they continue on these
Mhm.
horrible traditions in their kitchens and at home and with other chefs that they're training. And you're just like, and now you know how we end up where we are right now with these like toxic kitchen cultures and all the other things because no one's
Mhm.
raised their hand and said like, hey, how about we not think that's wrong? We
Mhm.
should fix that. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's nothing like when the onus of that falls to like the lone black or brown person in the room. So you're
Yeah.
just like, oh, this is our job again. Great, wonderful, awesome. Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Did you find like after culinary school and like getting into work, to lead with the idea like I have indigenous roots and so I cook from that space. Was that a part of even those conversations? Like did you find yourself with an opportunity to really bring that to the table with jobs that you were getting or looking for?
Yeah. Yeah. I would
Great.
always say like, this is who I am. Like it took me about 2 years to figure that out, to
Okay.
figure out how to say that. Um, my first job out of school was like crazy. Like the chef was never there, um, and yeah, and it was like anything went in this kitchen. Like it was one of those.
You're like it's Wild Kingdom in here, friends.
It
This
is.
is
It is.
it's
And it was
hard to
like high
Go ahead.
volume and
Oh, that's even worse.
yeah. And it was just like crazy. It was like craziness. You know those places.
Yeah. And you're just like, all right, if I survive this, I'm getting out.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's
Mhm.
like, how do you expect someone to learn anything in that environment? I guess you don't. I guess the idea is like, you're not here to learn, you're here to produce. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I got fast.
there
I
you
mean,
go.
I know I can I can it was a wood but I started out on Gardmo and then I moved up to grill and it's a wood fire grill. So I can do that like
There you
for,
go. Shit,
like crazy amounts.
it's like a choose your own adventure kitchen there. You're like, all right, what do I want to learn? How can I move myself up the space? And here we are. And I'm just like, okay, yeah. Coming out of culinary school, you're like, okay, so this is kind of a DIY career thing because based on this kitchen, if I don't figure it out, I'm not going to. Um,
Mhm. Pretty
when you
much.
were thinking about your own work and your own business, after spending that time in like all, kind of the pre-made kitchens, as I call them at this point, and like in other restaurants and things like that, the that moment where you're like, okay, I need to do my own thing. Because a lot of people, they exit the kind of the traditional trajectory because they're like, I'm not able to like find my voice here. I'm not able to move up the way I want to. Like they have those types of reasons to like get out. And so if you don't feel like who you are and how you grew up and how you grew up eating is something that can be like, put out there through
Mhm.
where you're working right now. A lot of people are like, well, I can't, I'm never going to be able to shine here. I'm never going to be able to use my own like culinary point of view here or cook the food that I'm passionate about. So at what point for you was kind of like that turning point where you're like, okay, it's time for me to like step out and really take a risk and like do my own thing here?
Um, it kind of took a while. I was doing like like smaller catering gigs on the side um, for different Native nonprofits here. Um, so I was like very unofficial, um, and and then I was working at this one place called uh, Damn the Weather, and which is a great place here in Seattle and Pioneer Square downtown. And it kind of got to the point of where I was doing like all of these things and doing like being asked to do like bigger events and just not having like the infrastructure um and so that's when I was like, oh, okay, maybe I should start thinking about stepping
Yeah,
it up. um
exactly.
and and then I ended up working at this one other place um about 2 years later. I think I'm confusing my timeline. Um, but I was asked to be part of. In fact, I'm wearing this sweater. Um, Part of the I Collective, which is
Oh, okay. Yeah.
which is a indigenous um, like cooks nonprofit.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
I have a bit of a line in there from a few folks. They were like, "Hey, do you know about I Collective? You know about I Collective?" Because there's a couple of
Oh,
there's a couple of other chefs that I'm connected to that are part of the organization. So they were like, "Do you know about I Collective?" I'm like, "Not yet. I'm headed over to the website right now."
oh,
So yeah, and it was one of those things where someone would, when I was asking about like who can I have on, who should be on the podcast, that was the first thing that most people were like, go there, go there, go there. So yeah, so out short of like direct recommendations, that was like the first place people kept sending me. So like Christina Stanley was one, another person I interviewed for like the Millie magazine spread that I did. So she was one that was pointing back to the Eye Collective.
She is so great.
Yeah. And then Britt Reed, she was another one that was like, hey,
Uh-huh.
yeah, you should jump on the website and see who's there.
Hmm.
And like, like any of those people are great to talk to. And so, yeah, I got very familiar very quickly with the website and the work that everyone's doing. And so I just thought that was like, yeah, it was definitely a sign from the universe to like, this is definitely a direction you need to go. And like
Hmm.
these are conversations you absolutely need to start having, because people should know specifically about like seed saving and things like that. Because again, it's a culturally shared activity. I mean, enslaved Africans came with different types of seeds in their hair because they didn't know where they were going and they needed to be able. They didn't know if they were going to be able to feed themselves. And so, like this idea of keeping seeds because because essentially we come from these agricultural communities, and so we
Hmm.
think in a way that it's like, okay, so will we have how are we feeding the next few generations and not just the one we're currently living in. So yeah, so the website was just like refreshing and a tonic in the world gone mad at this point. So oh yeah. um so for Birch Basket, like once you were like kind of feet on the ground about it, you know, what moves were you making to kind of get yourself out there in the world and get people familiar with the brand? Because I read your feature for Seattle. Is it Seattle Times? Am I
Uh-huh.
losing my mind there? Yeah. Which was a couple of years ago. And then, like, so what does that, what are you, where are you at now? And like, what are you looking for? It's hard to answer this question in the middle of like a worldwide pandemic, but I feel like if anyone is able to like think into the future, we have that capability. So before maybe your business was rudely interrupted, where were you going and like, what were your plans, to build your business out?
um yeah, before everything was came to a screeching halt.
Yeah.
um yeah, I was still working, like full time. I had a full time job and the business.
I understand that
Uh,
life. Mhm. Mhm.
uh, and then about 3 weeks before the lockdown, I quit my job because I had enough work to,
So wrong. I'm
right,
so sorry.
right.
I was like, at this point, we can kind of find some humor in that, but it's just like, that is so painful.
Yeah, yeah. And then within the first 2 weeks of March, all of my work for the whole year just got canceled.
You just, it's
Yeah,
just,
it was really awful, awful.
yeah,
It's just
yeah. You're like,
really sad.
I don't know what amount of smudging I need to do to fix this, but this is not working for me. So we need a conversation with whoever's ancestors is responsible for this. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it was really hard.
Did you have employees and like people on staff at that point?
No,
Okay.
it was some smaller events that I could do, just
Okay.
like to goes and things like that. But like, I was just thankful that I hadn't ordered any food and stuff. Like,
Oh my god, yeah. Because then you'd really have to be
yeah.
like, "Okay, we're just gonna turn the apartment or turn the house or turn the garage or turn someone else's house into, like, a small grocery store because
Mhm.
I have all this product I need to get rid of, and I am not going to do that on my own." Um, yeah, that's it was such a weird moment because you didn't know how long things were going to last, and it was just like, do I proceed like it's going to be a 2 week hiccup and just kind of continue on as business as usual, or do I like really do a full pause and just like I don't know what this is going to end up being, so how about I not expend money? um, you know, just planning
Yeah.
for something that I'm not going to be able to use. Oh man. Yeah, that's I don't think people understand like the weight of that. Like when you kind of go, oh, okay. Especially when you are like, 'cause I used to do like freelance catering, and so at some point you're just like you create this calendar and this like book of business that kind of helps you
Hmm.
get into 6 months from now. By the time the summer comes, I'll have this much in revenue, and I can do these other things. And to like see that completely just disappear.
Hmm. It was just like flames.
It's just like I don't even understand. And then because people are like, oh, people need to pivot. I'm like, do you understand what that means? Like that means there has to be space for all these people who need to like move into like new directions. And there's
Hmm.
not always space for everybody to do. So not everybody can like write for like a food magazine all of a sudden. Not everybody can become like a freelance food writer all of a sudden. Like
Hmm.
the other places in food that don't necessarily require that type of service execution, like there's not a ton of room for everybody. So like I'm not going to become a food blogger all of a sudden in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, because it's not like people will decide to start reading more all of a sudden either. So, so it's like I don't know how successful that's going to be. I'm just going to wait. Were you able to keep your other job?
No, I had quit.
Oh yeah. See, my brain forgot that so quickly because I was being super hopeful and optimistic. Wow. So yeah, she's like, so I quit that job, going, I'm good now, and then it's like,
Hmm.
was that a food related job, or were you kind of just like staying
No,
outside
it
of the
was. I
space?
was working at a restaurant.
Yeah, that's what happens. People are like, do you have a backup plan? My backup plan is closed, people. Um,
And
wow.
they shut down because of COVID.
Just oh, okay. That's just so
Yeah.
mean. So mean. Oh my gosh. So and how long, and that was like what, last year in like March or April?
March.
March. Okay. Between like March and now, like how has your life been? That's such an odd question to ask people, like, so how you doing? You're just like, I'm not, my head hasn't exploded, but outside of that.
um, it's been rough.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah. I moved in with my sister and her husband and their two kids. Um, I have had like a lot, like I said before, I have epilepsy. I've been having a lot of episodes.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's the main reason why I moved in.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's because my doctor was like, you can't live by yourself anymore.
More. Ooh.
um,
Ooh. How has that affected your work over the last 7 years? Like knowing, like, was that something that you took a pause on when you were like, okay, I'm getting out of like working in like doing work in missions and like making this transition to food? Was that in your thought process? Like, okay, I can successfully like do this food
oh
thing
yeah,
with
absolutely.
cool.
That was like I knew when I started cooking, or when I started culinary school, I knew I was that my seizures were well enough under control
Okay.
that I was safe
Mm,
and that the people around me were going to be safe.
okay.
Um, and so that that
That
was
was at
always like the
least
the
the year.
the
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Because I think about like those particular factors. Like for me, like I got into when I started my first restaurant job, I had some challenges because I was born with like what people would say like bad feet, and which I just never, as a young person, I didn't think about it. Like I knew I wasn't allowed to like be involved in like athletics. I had like a podiatrist by the time I was like 3 or 4 years old. I was wearing like custom orthotics by the time I was in like second grade. Um, I had to like have a surgical procedure when I was first born, like the first 2 weeks of my life. I had to have a surgical procedure to like surgically
Oh,
separate my feet at the ankle, and then they reconstructed my arch, reconstructed my ankle, and a lot of the bones and
wow.
stuff in that space. And so like I just grew up with like that's just kind of in the background, it's just part of like my life, and I have to kind of think about it sometimes because as a kid you don't think about that stuff. You're just like, that's all right. But I didn't do a lot of like broken ankles and that kind of thing, and it's probably because I didn't do like athletics because I was like not allowed. But I'd never thought about having a job where I was on my feet all the time. So it wasn't something
Hmm.
I factored in. And so when I made the transition into food, it still didn't like hit me that I would like be on my feet for like 18, 19 hours a day. Just didn't
Hmm.
occur to me. And so like my very first restaurant job, I was in New York. Was in New York, and I think I woke up one morning and my ankle was completely swollen. Like I had broken it, and it looked
Oh,
terrible. And I was like, what is wrong with this foot? But like the chefs that we are, we wrap it up, stick a
uh-huh.
band-aid on it and go to work. And
Yep.
so I kind of like wrapped my foot up with like an ace bandage and put my shoes on and got on the train and went to work. And so eventually the chef I was working for noticed it because he looked down and he saw me with my shoes on, and he's just like, "What's wrong with your ankle?" And I'm like, because it didn't hurt. There was no pain. It was just swelling. I was like, I don't know. I woke up and it looked like that this morning. And he's like, do you need to go to the hospital? He was very panicked. And I thought it was very sweet. And I was like, no, I don't think I need to go to the hospital. It's not broken. It's just swollen. So maybe it's just like some edema or something like that in your foot. So it took about a week for it to go away, and it went away, and it didn't return for probably like 2.5 years. So I thought maybe there was
Uh-huh.
just like a pulled tendon or something weird, some inflammation. And so I ended up working at a hotel, like managing a hotel for, I don't know how I ended up in that job from that place, but I ended up managing a property. And so I had to wear like heels every day. I was again on my feet
Mm.
every day. Like I was doing housekeeping, like flipping mattresses and stuff in heels and I
Mhm.
was a psycho. And so I was like, okay. And some point I woke up and my foot was swollen again. And I was like, so I go to like urgent care. They did an x-ray. Everything looked, all the bones were sound. And this orthopedic surgeon who I guess was doing a rotation, he showed up, and the doctor who x-rayed my foot was like, I'm going to have him look at it just to see what's going on here. And so he
Mhm.
takes this very quick peripheral look at it, and he's like, it looks like you have some injury to this tendon right here. And so he points it out, and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Like I was born kind of with these foot challenges. So he's like, yeah, so you probably need to in the very near future go see a podiatrist or an orthopedic surgeon. I'm like, all right. And I just shoved it to the back of my mind. They gave me some crutches, and I proceeded to just go back to work like a crazy person because
Yeah.
that's what you do. So
Yeah.
it took quite a few years, but finally, like those chronic issues returned. And about 4 years ago, I was just like, my foot was progressively being in more and more and more and more pain. And so I had like, at one point, I woke up and I could not put any weight
Oh.
on either foot, which made the morning really interesting. And
Yeah.
so eventually, like, immediately panic, call like my doctor, and he's like, you need to see a podiatrist. So, like, long story short, my podiatrist was like, so what do you do for a living? And I'm like, I'm a chef. And he just kind of looked at me like, you need to make some new career choices. And I was just like, crap. I just don't ever like. So now when I talk to people who have worked in food and who have any type of like physical challenge that could possibly impair or impede or interrupt, like I always have to think about like, okay, how are you managing that? Because I knew for me, like, I think I got one more year out of like physically being in a kitchen. And then at that point, my podiatrist was like, you can either stop what you're doing or you'll have to have surgery, and that'll take you off of your feet for 3 years anyway. And yeah,
Whoa.
so I was just like, okay, so we're at that point. It's that serious. And so like now when I look at people, I'm just like, whenever someone's like, yeah, I go to work with this particular challenge in mind. And they're like, people are like, you don't think about it. I'm like, you don't, because you're in the food, you're in the work, and you're not necessarily thinking about how something could stop you from doing that. If anything, you're thinking about, okay, what are the solutions if I have problems, if I have trouble, and then you just keep working. So yeah, so I appreciate that information, like for you sharing that. I know like, oh, so medical stuff is always like a weird thing to talk about if someone's not comfortable, and you just never know where people are. Like you never know you can never gauge the temperature on something like that. Cause people are like, I don't want to talk about it. And other people are like, I want to talk about it all the time. And you're like, okay, um, sure, chat about it, like whatever you want to say. But I kind of thought like some people who are, essentially working in under some of the same like physical conditions, because the work in the kitchen is stressful. And if you do have like conditions that are exacerbated by stress, then it's like, how are people managing? How are people doing their work and making progress and, managing those things in their lives as well? So that's my 2 cents. So you're living with your sister and her husband, you're living with the kids. um your doctor's like, you don't need to live alone anymore. So what
Yes.
does work look like for you right now, or even are you even thinking about work at this point?
I am always thinking about work.
Mm,
Um,
aren't we
yeah,
all? Yeah,
I can't, I can't not.
it's tied
um,
to my identity on some level, so yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I am constantly doing something,
Okay, good.
whether it's, excuse me,
Mhm.
um, whether it's just a day of emails or it's something like this, or like I said, I work with a lot of the native nonprofits here, um, and so I I do a lot of like here. What's an example? So for the Urban Indian Health Institute um, here in Seattle, I do a lot of like little things for them. Whether it's like I created like a soup packet that they send out when they were doing like in-person events, like tabling and things. Um, they would hand it out, but now they're like um, uh, uh, sending it out in like raffles and things like that. Uh, my sister, who I live with, she's the executive director of the Chief Seattle Club, which is the um, native. Oh, what is the word? Uh, Native homeless shelter.
Okay.
Um, and so I am working working with them to do a, a cafe. Um,
Nice.
yeah, yeah,
Nice.
it's gonna be really cool.
Sweet.
Somebody is donating uh, farm property so that yeah, it's like this whole it's
It's
gonna
a
be a
thing.
beautiful beautiful
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So we're working on that.
Great.
Yeah, I just like a lot of like little
Little seeds of
a
things that are
lot of
like
little
gonna grow into something cool and great
yeah,
eventually. Like, I think that's where a
yeah.
lot of people are. They're like, I have a lot of seeds in the ground at the moment. I'm just waiting to
Mhm.
see what happens when they like germinate and grow and become fruitful. Because
Yeah.
some seeds will definitely like jump off like so much faster than others, and then other things are just like, I'm in the wait and
Mhm.
see right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I'm like, that's so great though. I
Mhm.
mean, like things that we need to be doing are finding us in the middle of like a global pause, um, which I could only hope we walk away from it with something. I hope people just don't waste the moment. It feels like it could be squandered really easily, especially complaining or like not having like having zero perspective about it. But I feel like in
Mhm.
in this way we have a really interesting way to not just pause on our own. It's like the collective pause is really what's interesting to me, and like having to rethink how we work, why we work, who we work with, how we communicate, our relationship to work in general, like work and labor and all those things. So like I think this is a great moment to have those internal conversations and external conversations and like walk away with what do we do when we're all able to occupy spaces together again? How do we engage in work in a way that's more beneficial and productive and healthy and all of those things on the other side of this? So I'm excited to hear and see and like keep an eye on the seeds. You mentioned organizations that you work with. What organizations should we be paying attention to, following, elevating, spotlighting, giving to, what are some that are like close to your heart that definitely need a lot of support right now, specifically right now when like giving is like slowed down for so many?
Um, iCollective. Yeah,
Yeah.
we are doing a lot of really cool things, but we are just slowed down because we just don't have the money for it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all a volunteer basis. Like I don't get paid for any of the stuff that I do for iCollective. Um,
Okay.
and so it's it's hard to like get the stuff that we want to do off the ground, um, simply because we don't have
Yeah.
the money to do it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
That
like we
financial
want to
resource.
do, yeah,
How
yeah.
who knew we needed capital in order to exist in capitalism? um,
Yeah, yeah, and it's like I don't, yeah, and I work like probably 15, 20 hours a week for free on iCollective stuff. So it's like, and that's pretty average for us.
yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
was gonna say like that nonprofit scenario, like right now people are just burning more labor than they're able to get compensated for. And it's just like there's gotta be a
yeah,
better way. There's gotta be a better way to support people. Cause like I know for me, like I don't mind volunteering to do things. But I know there's a point where you kind of like cross the threshold and you're just like, okay, ooh,
yeah,
I'm going to
hmm,
spend this much time. All right. I need to think about how this value exchange is working. So yeah. So
yeah.
iCollective, any like indigenous women's based organizations?
Um, this isn't. It's mostly the Pawnee Seed Preservation Project.
Okay.
Um, it when the Pawnees were moved to Oklahoma in from Kansas in 1875, um, we lost a ton of our seeds, and um, I mean like 80% of our seeds,
Wow.
and yeah, and we lost the 1910 census. Um, in the 1910 census, there were 900 or 696 Pawnees when in 1875 there was about 30,000. So
Yeah. That little
yeah.
campaign worked of theirs.
Uh-huh. So about 15 years ago, um my aunt Deb Echo-Hawk, along with um Bonnie, I'm forgetting her last name, um a woman from um Nebraska, um they started to look for Pawnee seeds, and they started the Pawnee Seed Preservation Project. And farmers from traditional lands in Pawnee have donated and are growing traditional seeds in the traditional way, not
Nice.
using any like modern anything. And it's just like this beautiful, beautiful thing. And all of these seeds are coming back, seeds that we thought were lost forever. They're just coming
Mm,
back naturally, um, because they know.
yeah. Yeah. It's like, it's
Um,
time, friends. It's time.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
It's like,
Okay, awesome. So I've
yeah.
got Pawnee
So,
Seed Preservation Project. I've got I Collective. Okay. So yeah, because I always like to try to like boost other organizations that like a lot of the women I interview, spend a lot of work and time like investing in. And I just want other people to like, hey, these organizations are out here doing the kind of work that last longer than a single generation and are that have that carry that level of weight and importance. And so I think other people, people kind of get confused about wasting money on weird things, and it's like, you know what, how about you dedicate a little of that coinage to something useful. So yeah, so just finding places for people to do that I know that the work is getting done, and that your dollars are not being like squandered, and they're not just sitting there waiting for some application. It's just like, work is currently happening that needs financial support. And so like, if you donate something, it's going somewhere, it has a job, the money you
yeah.
donate to places. And so yeah, so that's why I'm always like, who else can we point out, who else can we shine some light on, so that way they get what they need. So so for because the hour goes by so fast. So how can we like support you, like where can we find your stuff? Are there types of projects you're looking for that you want to like get into? And where can we find you on like in the social media space? Because I know some people have social media but aren't necessarily active on social media, which is a completely fair thing. So what's the best way to kind of like just essentially keep tabs on you, just so we know exactly like what to support you in, and like when you're able to leave the house again, like the rest of us, like what kind of work can we kind of, so we can follow you and see where you're headed, after you get out of here, after we get out of this madness.
Yeah. Um, do follow me on Instagram, uh, Facebook, Twitter. I I'm very rarely on Twitter. It confuses me. Um, it's just too much. Twitter is too much. Um, I have a website.
Okay.
Um, website is birchbasketcatering.com. Um, and then all of my other social media is Birch Basket.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for hopping on here and chatting with me for a little while. You know what?